Welcome back, Gilbert students. Lesson 21 today, part 1. And what we're going to do here is we're going to talk about the causes of the Civil War. And there's a lot of them. And we're going to cover each and every one. And the reasons we call them causes of the Civil War, because these are going to be issues that the North and South are going to disagree on. And every time they disagree on an issue, they're going to become further and further divided, until eventually the South is just going to leave the United States. They're going to secede. They're going to form their own government, and they're going to go to war with the North over the issue of states' rights and slavery. And so we're going to take a look at each of these issues. Here they are. There's a lot of them, and we're going to go back. The first slide I'm going to show you today, we're going to go back to the year 1787. The first cause of the Civil War is going to be in 1820. So we're going to go back a ways. But you've got the Missouri Compromise, the Wilmot Proviso, the Compromise of 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act, Uncle Tom's Cabin. You're going to have the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which is going to lead to a whole lot of violence and Kansas acquiring the nickname of Bleeding Kansas. There's going to be violence in Congress. They're going to be going at it on the floor of the Senate. We're going to talk about the slave suing for his freedom, Dred Scott, and what was decided there. We're going to take a look at a series of debates between Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas. And then we're going to take a look at John Brown and what he does in Harper's Ferry. And we're going to end with the election of 1860. Causes of the Civil War. But before we begin getting into the causes, let's go back to the year 1787. And in 1787, we had the Northwest Ordinance. And what it did was it said, it outlined how new territories could become states. Well, the Northwest Territory was all located north of the Ohio River. And so the Ohio River became a dividing line between free and slave states. If you were north of the Ohio River, you were a free state. If you were south, you were a slave state. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to keep the balance of power equal in the Senate. By that I mean they wanted to keep the same number of free states as slave states. And in 1818 you had 11 free states, you had 10 slave states. But then you have Alabama and Missouri coming along. They want to be states. Now Alabama's a no-brainer. It's in the deep South. It's going to be a slave state, and it's going to make it 11-11. So Alabama becomes a state. But what are we going to do with Missouri? So in 1819, it's 11-11. And then Missouri comes along, and it's got a rare set of circumstances. Let's take a look at the map. So here's the Ohio River. Let me grab my pointer. This is the Ohio River, all right. North, free, south, slave. But if you take a look at Missouri, most of it lies above the Ohio River line. So that's going to be a cause of discussion between the senators. There's going to be a gentleman by the name of Talmadge says, hey, he's going to try to throw an amendment into all of this discussion. Says, hey, if Missouri becomes a state, it's got to be free. Now, you know the South's not going to go for that. And the South says that Congress can't decide the issue of slavery. It's up to the people who live in the territories to do that, all right? But then the problem comes, could slavery spread to Louisiana Territory, even if it's north of that Ohio River line? And that's what they wanted to avoid. If you start letting people vote on the issue, over here, they could vote for it, and then that Ohio River line becomes moot. So in 1820, Mr. Henry Clay, we talked about Henry Clay. His nickname is the Great Compromiser. We're going to talk about him a couple of times when talking about these causes of the Civil War. And he's going to come up with a compromise. Luckily for these senators, Maine comes along and says, hey, you know what? We'd like to be a state too. Maine is the northernmost piece of property in the United States. So that's a no-brainer. We're gonna make Maine a free state. We're gonna make Missouri a slave state. That balance of power remains equal at 12-12 now. And then we're gonna draw an imaginary line along the southern border. Right here. There's gonna be an imaginary line along the southern border of Missouri, and it's gonna go all the way to the end of the Louisiana Territory. We couldn't extend it all the way to the Pacific Ocean because we didn't own this land in 1820. So it's gonna end there. And according to the Missouri Compromise, with the exception of Missouri, anything north of the line would be free, anything south would be slave, and the people of Missouri would be able to decide. Well, they're a slave state. All right, so it's 12-12. All right, 1820, disagreement between North and South. All right, and then a gentleman by the name of David Wilmot. He was a representative from Pennsylvania. The year is 1846. We're getting ready to maybe go to war with Mexico. And he gets up in Congress and he states, hey, we want to ban slavery in any land that we're about to win from Mexico. If we win any land from Mexico, we must ban slavery there. The North says, yeah, we got to do that. The South, well, you know what the South is going to say. They're going to say no. This proviso never passed. But once again, you've got the North and the South disagreeing on the issue of slavery. And it's still early. California comes along. And we talked about the California Gold Rush. We talked about the tens of thousands of people that went to California and the need for California to become a state right away. All right? It's going to throw that balance of power off. California wants to be a free state. So free states are going to have more power. The Southerners, they say, hey, take that Missouri Compromise line now and extend it all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Anything north, free. Anything south, slave. But the Northerners reject that. Right? They want to get rid of slavery. So California will become that free state, though, which is going to lead to the Compromise of 1850. There are 4 parts to the Compromise of 1850. My man Henry Clay, he's the guy. He's going to come up with this stuff, all right? Along with Daniel Webster and John C. Calhoun, they come up with 4 parts that are supposed to make the South happy, supposed to make the North happy. Now, it's a compromise. Under a compromise, you don't get 100% of what you want, but you get enough that you're happy. So, first part, California becomes a free state. The North likes that one. Second part, in the new territories of Utah and New Mexico, the people that live there will be able to vote on the issue of slavery. That's called popular sovereignty. The South likes that. They could add 1, maybe 2 slave states. Right? The third part of the Compromise of 1850 is that they will end the sale of slaves in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. All right? You can no longer buy slaves in Washington, D.C. North likes that. The final piece is going to be a new Fugitive Slave Act will be passed. There was already a Fugitive Slave Act which dealt with the issue of escaped slaves, catching them and returning them to their owner. A new one's going to be passed, a tougher one. The South's going to like this, all right? So that's the Compromise of 1850, where they wanted to extend this line all the way there. And the North didn't like it because then, you know, north of the line, Utah could possibly vote for slavery. So, disagreement. And so let's talk about the new Fugitive Slave Act. Southerners loved it, Northerners hated it. Northerners felt like they were now part of the slave system. Because under this new law, Northerners were required, if they knew the whereabouts of an escaped slave, to alert the authorities and turn the slave in. Under the Fugitive Slave Act, A special system of courts was set up that dealt just with escaped slaves or fugitive slaves. And a federal commissioner would handle each case. If the federal commissioner listened to the case and freed the person in front of him, he received $5. If he determined that the person in front of him was indeed an escaped slave and he returned them to the South, he got $10. So a little financial incentive there to send people back. Some people, even when they weren't slaves to begin with, they were free African Americans, were taken to the South, and now they were slaves. Southerners liked it. Their property was being returned. Under this law, Northerners, if they were found hiding an escaped slave or knew the whereabouts of an escaped slave, didn't do anything about it, they could be fined $1,000. They could be jailed for 6 months. Did Northerners help? No, they fought against this law, but it was a tough law. Southerners liked it, and the Northerners are going to fight against it. A book. A book is going to be one of the causes of the Civil War. Uncle Tom's Cabin. It was written by a lady named Harriet Beecher Stowe, and Harriet Beecher Stowe came from a very well-known religious family. Her brothers were preachers, all right? She lived in Cincinnati, all right? She had seen escaped slaves crossing the Ohio River. Cincinnati's right on the Ohio River, and coming to the north, okay? The book is about a kind old slave named Uncle Tom, who eventually in the book is going to be beaten to death by his owner. All right? So, Northerners could not believe what was happening in this book, and they believed that slavery was exactly like what they were reading about. Millions of copies of this book were sold worldwide. A lot of people in the North now became abolitionists. An abolitionist is someone who wanted to end slavery. Southerners said, this book is fiction. This is not how slavery works. But once again, the North and South are becoming further and further divided. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, proposed by a senator from Illinois known as Stephen Douglas. And Stephen Douglas wanted to build a railroad starting in Chicago, Illinois, that would then go all the way to the Pacific Ocean. It would have to go through this area of land, and but at that time it was known as the unorganized territory. So he's going to come up with a plan. And according to the Kansas-Nebraska Act, you take the territory and you divide it into two territories, the Nebraska territory and the Kansas territory. The people who lived in those territories would be able to use popular sovereignty and vote on the issue of slavery. And Northerners hated this, because if you look at the map again, both of these territories are north of that Missouri Compromise line. They're north of the Ohio River. It's supposed to be free there. But now the people are going to be able to vote on the issue of slavery, and Northerners were worried. All right? So Kansas is going to vote on the issue of slavery, which would be fine if it was just the people of Kansas voting on it, but that's not what happened. You had abolitionists come all the way from New England to Kansas just to be able to, when it came time to vote, vote against slavery. And then you had people from Missouri who moved into Kansas to, when it came time to vote, vote for slavery. And then these two competing forces, there's going to be violence. All right? It's going to lead to bleeding Kansas. That's my man, John Brown. He's a nut. We're going to learn about him. Bleeding Kansas. That was a nickname given to Kansas over all the fighting that's going to occur between these two opposing groups that come to Kansas over the issue of slavery. Two capitals are going to spring up in Kansas. One is going to be a pro-slavery capital. That's going to be Lecompton. The city of Lawrence will be the anti-slavery capital. And the first event that's going to happen is called the Sack of Lawrence. In Lawrence, the anti-slavery capital, pro-slavery men are going to go. They're going to destroy the newspaper office. They're going to destroy homes. And then they're going to leave. All right? That's where John Brown comes in. John Brown, with his sons, is going to go to Pottawatomie Creek, Kansas. All right? In the middle of the night, he and his sons are going to drag 5 pro-slavery men out of their beds. They're going to drag them into the middle of the street, and they are going to hack them to death with swords. Right? So the violence has begun. And by the end of it all, in 1856, more than 200 people are going to be killed in violence in Kansas. Now, when the voting is done, Kansas will vote become a free state. Right? But because of what happened in Kansas, it's going to lead to a little violence in Congress. This is Senator Charles Sumner. That is Representative Preston Brooks. All right? On the floor of the Senate, Sumner's going to be sitting down. Preston Brooks is going to come along. Why is he doing it? Why is he going to beat Charles Sumner with his cane? Because of the violence in Kansas, Charles Sumner got up on the Senate floor and gave a speech. And in his speech, he mentioned some Southern senators. Not very nicely, by the way. He did not say nice things about them. One of the senators that he talked about was Senator Andrew Butler. Andrew Butler, sorry, I forgot his name, from South Carolina. Andrew Butler's not even there. He didn't even hear about it. But Preston Brooks is his nephew. He did hear about it. And even though Preston Brooks is a representative, works on the other side of the Capitol, the next day, he comes to the Senate. Sumner is sitting, doesn't see him coming. Preston Brooks just starts beating him with his cane. I mean, he beats him to the point where for the rest of his life, Senator Charles Sumner never recovered from his wounds from this beating. Northerners were outraged that this violence could lead to the floor of the Senate. How did Southerners respond? Well, unfortunately, Preston Brooks broke his cane, so Southerners sent him new canes in the mail. And on the canes it said, hit him again. North and South, they're divided. That's the end of lesson 1. I'll see you in lesson 2.